Alright everyone, it's time for Occult Literature, video number 311, Sex Worship. Link in the description of my edition of this work on Amazon. Second and third links are to my books blogs there. This is 102 pages long, so it's sort of an intermediate read. And basically, it's about the traditional, during the late 1800s, early 1900s, there was a series of privately printed materials on the very taboo subject of the origins of religion being mainly related to sexual reproduction. This is something that now is sort of taken for granted as being an aspect of early religion. It's not really debated. Even people who are religious will say, yeah, parts of our religion were based on basically the lingam and yoni, penis and vagina and so forth. It's certainly part of certain magical practices. It's not really denied anymore. About the only thing they would deny is that that's the predominant origin of it, but the actual inclusion of phallism and things of that nature, really, it's basically sacrosanct, certainly in an academic context. It's an interesting book, and what you get with some of them is they're more focused. For instance, you have Ophiolatreia, which is about serpents, which is taken to be phallic in nature. Cultus Arborum, which is trees, which I would disagree a little bit maybe on that. It's a little bit of a stretch at times in that particular work. But this work gives a more broad overview. For instance, it talks about the ring being similar to the yoni, which is a Hindu symbol, which is vaginal in nature. And then the lingam, which in this book actually includes this particular line. Typically the lingam or the phallic aspect is more common, and there were actually cults back in maybe quite old periods that would fight one another. They'd wage wars over whether the male or female generative aspect was more important and or should be venerated at all. Very, very interesting. It also talks about sacred temple prostitutes. It doesn't really go into the sex cult aspect of maybe modern occultism, like the actual use of sexuality in certain forms of black magic or something. That's absent from this. This is more of an anthropological study. And it's very interesting because it has an index, by the way, listing further works. The vast majority of them are privately printed, and that's because, especially in the United Kingdom at the time, where a lot of these anthropological studies about India especially were being conducted, it would have been no printer legitimately licensed by the Crown, because no First Amendment, of course. No Crown licensed printer was going to print up your debauchery, your terrible polemic about how Christianity couldn't possibly have anything to do with the generative aspect, the idea of production, that God is the prime creator, literally the creative aspect of all the universe, couldn't possibly be a statement that has anything to do with human reproduction, with your gross physical matter. Now, of course, you've got to understand, when you're looking at more modern day, and I use that term slightly loosely, ideologies, a lot of those aspects were reduced. The initial pagan or early Christian or Jewish interpretations of practices and so forth, they changed over time. And generally became, I would argue, maybe more boring, including within paganism. It's funny how woke some pagans actually can be. Their ancestors were chopping each other's heads off and using their skulls for rituals. Now, you've got to mind pronouns. This is a fascinating subject, though, and if you wanted further reading, I think I've released a dozen or so works. I think all of the Hargrave Jennings works I think I've already created. Fish, Flowers, and Fire. Fish, by the way, another potential yoni symbol at times, or phallic in nature. Cultus Arborum, Ophiolatreia. Phallicism was a standalone work, I think the first one. Rock Remains is something about old ruins. The ring is included, the serpent, the tree, all of the basic materials that became these other works are spoken of in this particular work by Clifford Howard. Now, he's probably not the one that printed the private printing ones. It's speculated to be Hargrave Jennings, but it's not known because it was privately printed and no author was actually listed. It's an enigmatic topic because you got to understand a lot of this great information isn't even associated with a person because of the taboo nature of the actual writings themselves. Back then, in the Victorian or Edwardian era, this sort of thing was considered massively taboo. People would have their guilty pleasure. They'd have their phallicism book underneath their pillow or something like that and get in trouble if anyone knew that they had it. And basically they were all... It's funny because actually... If you look at it realistically, considering they had like fucking Ted kids, they were mating all the time and they were fully aware of sexuality, but they just never talked about it. And so it was really funny because they were extremely repressed, but they were also hypersexualized. And that sort of, in this era, because of anthropology, it wasn't considered as taboo to look at a naked native as it was to look at a naked person of your own race. And so people were titillated by all sorts of crazy stuff. There was one medium, I can't remember her name, and she used to strip naked and do things with who we presume to be actually her lesbian lover at the time, as sort of an exhibitionism fetish at the time. And this is actually known. I can't remember the name of the medium, and she presented it as well. You know, if I'm generating ectoplasm and stuff, I have to be naked, otherwise people think it's a trick. Now, of course, it was for other purposes. All of those Victorian-era men were very interested in going to those shows multiple times to see. They were totally looking at the ectoplasm and phantoms and stuff like that. That in and of itself. My interest in this subject almost runs more to the literary tradition and the bizarre situations behind the creation of these actual texts than the texts themselves in the academic sense. Because, of course, some of it, again, like with elements of Cultus Arborum and a few others, the idea of the Ankh or the cross, the idea that it's all phallic symbolism, I reject, and I think most modern individuals do. But it is interesting. There's definitely an aspect there. Apparently, like in Norse communities, they used to take babies and bless them by passing them through a ring, sort of like a rebirth sort of symbolism. Anyway, again, link in the description of my edition of this work on Amazon. It is highly recommended if you're interested at all in that sort of proto-anthropological era of the Victorians and Edwardians and the issue of phallicism. This is a great springboard. This would be the best basic work. All of the others tend to be more specific. They're more detailed, but they're like single issue. Again, one on serpents, one on tree worship, one on rock remains in Ireland, Celtic remains or whatever, one on the use of the ring, and like half a dozen others. And second and third links as well to my books, blogs. I do have other works. Mostly they're under the academic header. That's about all. Peace out.